Good morning, everybody. Firstly, in my 15 years of attending events like this, I've never been to a place so beautiful and amazing. I hope HIMSS learns something from this place next year. And thank you, everybody, for the invitation. I've had the opportunity to speak to each one of them, and I think you'll find that each of their stories, exactly what they're doing, is going to be very exciting. I think many of you will resonate. You'll share some of the stories, maybe feel some of the pains, and I would say come with the questions at the end. When I saw the name Digital Health Startups and I saw 30 minutes, I was like, wow, how do you put a startup in 30 minutes? So this is going to be interesting. Please have your questions to the end, and I will start. I know we're over time. So let's start, please, with first. Mike, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you to iSpy, and thank you to Brian, Isaac, and Mike Galvin from BAMI for this invitation. And thank you to Daniel Kraft for making me feel very underaccomplished, because I haven't flown an F-16 fighter, so it's only downhill from here. So I wanted to just share a little bit of what we've done at my group Satisfy and one of our joint ventures, which we've named AI for GI. I'm an adult GI physician, so I feel like a bit of an imposter here, but there is a lot of overlap, as we've heard from previous speakers, in disease states between the adults and children. And as a practicing physician, several years ago, I was frustrated by the increasing technology that we're using in the endoscopic practice that I and my colleagues do on a day-to-day basis, and the ability of the human eye to interpret what we're looking at on the screen. So we're getting better resolution, better lighting, filtered lights, chromoendoscopy, virtual chromoendoscopy. And all of that is improving what we see on the screen, but not necessarily translating into better physician performance. So clearly there are gaps and needs to address that problem. And if you look just in colon cancer, and I know that's obviously an incredibly, thankfully, rare situation in younger patients, but we miss colon polyps, precancerous colon polyps all the time. We probably miss 25% of polyps, which is really quite alarming. And clearly there are technologies out there, such as AI, that will help us bridge that gap and improve our early detection, which is key to earlier diagnosis and hopefully curative treatment. Optical biopsy is a lot of what we at my group have done. In other words, a virtual biopsy, so in live time using a camera to look at pathology, in this case colon polyps, for example, and be able to do a live virtual histology as to what it is we're looking at. Consistency of results with the human is clearly an issue. There's a lot of subjectivity in optical biopsy, which has been demonstrated in study after study, and some of the work that we've done hopefully will address that. And disease state scoring, so if we think about the inflammatory bowel disease, pretty common in children as well, Crohn's and colitis. Right now, our subjective interpretation of how active that patient disease is on their endoscopy is quite significant, so we've got machine tools to help us with that. we were asked to kind of give some of our experience as startups. How did we do things differently, or what were the barriers that we encountered? My vision from the beginning with our group was to try and put together a lot of the key ingredients from the beginning rather than add them in later. So that was obviously get clean and quality tag data. To have great clinical direction within the group, so have physicians in the group as well as machine learning and the like. Have academic buy-in, so thankfully it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, but if you're in the space, you have people who are leaders in this space. So for example, Doug Rex is the global leader bar none in colon cancer. Doug is in my academic circle, so I was able to engage Doug very quickly and say, this is what we are planning to do with this group, are you in? So that really helps to then open doors to industry and hopefully mean that you are also addressing the appropriate markets, because a lot of AI work, I think, is looking at solutions that maybe we don't need right now or we don't want. Just because it can be done doesn't mean we should be wasting resources. So hopefully it's better if you can address particular markets. So some of the work that we've done there, through the AI for GI venture, on the top of the bar there, you will see that we've got a solution in polyp differentiation, or rather clinical decision support around looking at polyps in real time. And this is something that we've partnered with Olympus which is going through regulatory right now and hopefully will be commercialized in the next 12 months or so. But there are many, many other verticals to look at in this space alone. The GI disease anatomy is a huge disease state. Inflammatory bowel disease, as I mentioned, esophageal and gastric disease, pancreas disease, and inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's and colitis really is a great opportunity. Endosurgery, somebody yesterday mentioned the IPEG group, the International Pediatric Endosurgery Group. I think our endosurgical approach is going to be changed by AI. This is Doug Rex, who's worked with this on the AI for GI project. Just a little bit of showing what we can actually do in real time. I'll just show.
So I want to demonstrate the AI program in action. There's a very small polyp here, a couple of millimeters in size. In white light, it looks like it has a little bit of a central valley sign in it. I'm going to turn the close focus on, and then to activate the AI, all we need to do is turn on the narrowband imaging. You can see that the program is really immediately developing high confidence that this is a type 2 lesion.
So I'll stop it there for time because I'm pretty much out of time here, but you can see that this is live time, pretty instantaneous virtual biopsy, which I think is going to radically change what we're doing on a day-to-day basis in the GI practice, but across other spaces, as you can see. Again, I can't overemphasize the need to have buy-in from the appropriate key opinions. If you're lucky enough to be networked in that space or you build those networks, you can then have these kind of people that we have working with us. So in IBD, we have Remo Paniccioni. In endoscopic surgery, we have Michael Burke. These are the leaders, bar none, in those spaces, and it really helps to make sure you're addressing the right targets, but also help with funding and industry relations. This is obviously a data infrastructure setup that is not unique. Many of us have described this in talks earlier today and yesterday. And it's clearly a very large addressable market. So in the interest of time, I'll thank you for your interest and pass on to my fellow panelists.
Mike, thank you. We'll pass now to Val. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Val, CEO of Life Assist. I don't have any slides, so you'll have to just focus on me, and there's no distractions here. I'm going to talk about two things. I will talk about the company Life Assist and what we do, and we were in one of the booths out there. But since this is a panel on digital health startups, what exactly is a startup, right? It's not a thing, it's a group of people. And I think that a lot of what happens in this ecosystem of startups as they get developed, whether it's in the Bay Area, in New York, Boston, or anywhere else in the country or the world, is there's a lot of challenges before a startup becomes a company. There's a huge chasm between that initial vision, that initial thought, that initial idea. And we've heard lots of little bits and pieces about what people have gone through. And sometimes it's a case of somebody being anemic and developing something out of necessity for them. And a lot of these things do come out of necessity. But then who are these people who then go out and put everything on the line? And what constitutes, and how do you get the product to work? How do you get the culture to be the right culture and have the right people and the right shared passion? And all of those things that come together. And those things are the microcosm of what it takes to become a startup in any industry. Then there's the second part, and in healthcare, I find it incredibly challenging. And we've heard, again, a lot of the companies here dealing with these things. Where does the money come from? Where's the ecosystem to develop that? It's great to hear that now in the last few years, and we heard that from Mercy Kids, that 4 years ago they created an innovation department and allocated resources. And most importantly is that cultural and strategic shift for the organization. So even if you do get the right group of people to come together with the right passion, and even if you are able to find the money and develop the right product, where does it go? How do you find the large corporations or the large customers who are actually able to take that product and inculcate it into their workflow, into their work streams? You know, we've all heard about what an EHR implementation can do to a hospital, right? It could be months, it could be years, and it could be millions and millions of dollars, and the disruption that it takes on the delivering organization and the receiving organization. All of those things have to somehow miraculously come together and work together in order for a company, a digital health startup, to be successful and to actually deliver a product that people want. And then, of course, where does the money come to pay? And in this country, I'm Canadian, so things are a little bit more simple in Canada and in some of the socialized healthcare. But here we have so many different layers, and then we have this move to value-based care, which again is a very disruptive force. So there's a lot of moving parts here that, again, I'm only going to touch on them at a very high level before a digital health startup becomes a real operating company with revenues and profits and sustainability. So that's that. What we do at Life Assist is we foresaw about 4 or 5 years ago more IoT devices, more care being delivered in the home, only because the demands and all the vagaries of the healthcare system simply couldn't be sustainable. And we've seen now, we know what the numbers are in the healthcare system in the US today. So we foresaw more and more care being delivered in the home, more devices being in the home collecting data. And so we built a platform that essentially connects all of those caregivers outside of the hospital. We know everything that goes on in the hospital, right? Without getting into, again, the challenges of EHRs. For the most part, once you're in the hospital, they know what room you've been, what clinician you've seen, what foods, what tests, they know all of that. What happens when you leave? And that's where the blind spot. Then you've got all the post-acute providers, clinics, family members, community resources. It could be schools. It could be extracurricular activities. There's a lot of other providers, formal care providers and informal ones that just happen to see what's happening with a child in their life under their care. And so all of that post-acute care is very challenging and very complicated, especially if you have somebody with multiple chronic conditions and very challenging post-acute care. So first of all, how does the hospital stay connected to that entire post-acute community? Well, today it doesn't really. Now, we have seen some things like telehealth. We've seen RPM, which we've heard a lot about. And those are wonderful advances because it does allow the hospital to reach into the home and to stay connected. But they tend to be very short-term, and they tend to be very episodic in nature. So what we did is we basically created a platform that is HIPAA compliant, where all the relevant care providers, whether it's a clinician, whether it's the original hospital, whether it's another specialty clinic, whether it's teachers or school faculty or sports teams, anybody in that child's environment who is a care provider can be on this platform with varying degrees of access and so on. And then what we've layered on there is a series of rules engine to manage all of those relationships. And then we've also integrated about 150 IoT devices so that we've really created in the home what we call a personal health record, right? So in other words, everything that happens in the post-acute environment, all that data is collected and managed and shared between all the relevant people. So there are no bottlenecks. I can't tell you how many people and it tends to be this 40 to 60-year-old ubiquitous woman. And in many cases, she's also a sandwich mom. So she's dealing with young children and possibly aging parents. And the burden of care on these individuals is beyond belief. So this is what we've done. I'd be happy to talk more about how we deal with post-acute care and the challenges of managing these really, really complex needs and what we do with all that data. But I'll pause for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Over, Lida, to you. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. Let me follow Val's example and talk to you a bit about life and life in startups. So maybe you can tell from my surname, but I grew up in Greece, and my father always taught me that I could be whatever I wanted in life. If I wanted to be a pilot or an astronaut, like Daniel Kraft was my role model, I could be one, because there are no limits, really. So as he sent me out to explore the stars and the universe, I soon discovered that I would meet disease in the horizon. Disease for my family, my loved ones, myself. There are no exceptions in that rule. And those experiences certainly define the person that you find in front of you today. Now, I became a physician and I practiced for 8 years. And in medical school, I was told that there are diseases that are multifactorial. We don't understand them. We just treat symptoms. And then there's rare disease. There's no cure, no hope. So I was told how to break bad news and be compassionate. But I stand in front of you today because I choose first to be passionate. I choose to take that pain and turn it into passion and become an entrepreneur. Now, many people ask me, what does it take to enter the world of entrepreneurship? And I remember Elon Musk's words, it's just like chewing still whilst looking at the abyss, as simple as that. But what I believe is a simple recipe is that you need to take courage and imagination as your only limit. You need to be able to fail fast and laugh at yourself about it. You need to think that in life there are no absolutes and only hypotheses. You need to be open, and when you do meet Darth Vader in that universe, you need to reconsider the relationship you're going to build with him. And what do I mean by that? How does it translate in practical terms in digital health and pediatrics? Where never in my imagination, when I was training as a pediatrician, did I think that we would see apps for developmental assessments, gaming for ADHD, and digital diagnostics for autism, just to name a few. Digital platforms are ways of empowering people, patients, families, physicians, a way of promoting public health and addressing social inequalities. And this is just the beginning. So the real question is, what problem are we trying to solve? And also, what tools and resources can we use to facilitate that? Now, Stanford Biodesign advocates that innovation is a repeatable process. I totally agree with that, and I am not a biodesign fellow. But what I'm saying here, there are 269 videos free online for you to use if you want to become an entrepreneur and choose a problem to solve correctly. Because we humans do tend to see what we want to see at the critical moments, and that can't be happening at startups, because that could mean failure. I've experienced near failure in a previous startup that I was, where we thought we had the right prototype, but when we actually hit the road and asked 100 customers about value propositions, we realized we were wrong. So my advice to you is postpone prototypes and inventions until you truly understand the problem and the stakeholders. Put on business model canvases and also navigate your stakeholder ecosystem. I discovered that healthcare is like a multi-headed beast. The ones that I used to read in mythology when I was a child, when you chop one head off and another one appears. So Hercules used fire to get rid of that problem. So allow your passion for change to be that fire. Now, when you do arrive at the prototyping level, be open. Invite people who are different than you on your team, different backgrounds, different expertise. Be inspired, learn from them. And also, when you do encounter Darth Vader, in whatever form he appears to you, as a VC or a pharmaceutical, whatever you consider to be a Darth Vader in your universe, reconsider how you're going to frame your relationship with him. If he's a VC, pediatrics is a small market. Let us not fool ourselves. Do you have a sustainable business model? Do your tools solve other problems outside pediatrics that you can leverage? If they're pharmaceutical, well, deliver value for them and ask for value back to your patients. They need digital biomarkers and endpoints for digital clinical trials. This could be a starting point. Also think about pricing. There are many successful models out there. The hepatitis C Netflix model of a one price unlimited drugs is a huge success, happened in Australia and 2 states in the United States. As a warrior alone in the universe, remember you are actually not alone. Use crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, data donors. Use institutions such as the UNICEF Digital Health Initiative or the Bill Gates Foundation. Think about different markets at different pricing points. Leverage those communities. Ultimately, creativity is your resilience and you need to use it. But creativity does not mean living in the world of imagination. It means taking what you've imagined and creating it into reality. Because ultimately, it is what we achieve within that will change outer reality. Thank you.
Lida, thank you very much. I have a question. I come from a different background and approach this differently. I never planned to get into healthcare. I got into it because my wife had a traumatic event. And as I learned through healthcare, I realized actually the procedure they used was pretty archaic. So I come here from a personal pain point, and that drove me to developing some technologies. When I first became an entrepreneur, I was delusional. I read these stories, you read these magazines, that's not really the real world, and we do learn. So going through the journeys that you've gone through, Mike, maybe you can start. If you went back in time, what would you do differently? Maybe not start a company at all?
I would have spotted, I certainly came across a few Darth Vaders in my time, and knowing how to deal with those might have been a great insight. You know, you're absolutely right, Bobby. We do learn as time goes by. I broke the rules a little bit in terms of looking for, doing market research to look at a truly addressable problem that needed a solution. So I just had my general readership that we needed to be doing virtual pathology better. I hadn't done any market research on that, and I convinced a large group who was very funded, but a startup, to partner with us, key opinion leaders to partner with us and say, look, this is a solution that we need to bring, even though we haven't gone out there. And so sometimes you have to take a bit of a gamble as well, that you are, not saying I was a thought leader, but many others were trying this, but take a bit of a risk as well. If you wait for all the pieces to fall together, you won't necessarily get there. The other thing is I wouldn't be put off as much as I was maybe by dissension. So when I speak at symposia now and I have people challenge me and say, but this AI solution in your scopes, it's going to slow me down. I don't need AI for my colonoscopies. It's going to take me an extra 5-10 minutes. By the time your device has looked for things, I can have removed the polyp and send it to the lab. And you say to those physicians, well, you miss polyps all the time. But you get paid, whether your detection rate is 20% or what it should be 50%. It's called the ADR, the adenoma detection rate. So if you're very low, you're still getting paid. Maybe in 3 years' time, what needs to happen is it's mandated that you need to meet a minimum performance standard. Otherwise, you don't get paid. And whatever it takes to get you there, whether it's go slower and schedule less patients, or use tools such as AI. That is a barrier that I think now I would be less put off. When I have people pushing back and say, oh, no, we're fine as we are. You then have to say, okay, really? But there's gaps here. Your performance is substandard. Or many of our colleagues' performance is substandard. How do we get there? So maybe I'd be less put off by the naysayers.
Thank you, thank you. Val, you and I had a conversation earlier. You've gone through 3 startups. You've experienced almost everything so far, but you're still in it. What drives you? What keeps you going forward and stay in this world and not giving up?
I ask myself that a lot. I'm a very psychologically minded person, so I basically drill all of that down. I think part of it is I like waking up in the morning and having more questions than answers. That's just what drives me as an individual. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, so I can't contribute in that way. But I think there is a lot more, to me, there's a lot more satisfaction in just looking back and saying this started from a germ, and you're right, I've done this 3 times from scratch. It started as a germ 2 years, 3 years ago. And now we actually have a product, and it's actually helping people, and it's doing things, not everything that you envisioned it to do. And in many cases, in the world of a startup, where you start is rarely where you end, right? It might have some semblance of where you started. I think that for a lot of people have to really, really understand what it takes. And I don't think that still, I live in the Bay Area, and there's literally in every coffee shop you walk into, there are 55 entrepreneurs, right? And they're working on building business plans and so on. But the reality is very few people are cut out for it. For the amount of sacrifice, for the amount of just giving up literally everything to just do that. It's not a job. It has to be a passion. It has to start from there because, as everybody here knows, you get hit in the head every single day, multiple times. And I've always envisioned when I was a kid, I'm sure other people have had it, there was those blow-up things and they had a heavy base, and you would just go punch it. That's essentially what you do. And every single day you'll get punched and punched, and you got to figure out a way to put more air into that doll to keep it going. A lot more don't. That's just on the individual side. Then, as I talked about earlier, the ecosystem has to be there to support that. And that's where I think in healthcare, it's still sorely lacking. From the early stage innovation ecosystem to funding, in pre-seed and A rounds, we are woefully underfunded. So, and that's going to be one of my beefs going forward too.
Thank you. Lida, you talked about having a community, and community brings so much strength and power. At times when you're looking at a single problem, you're looking to solve, you get into the weeds, you don't look at high level, you get lost. Sometimes it can get lonely. And creating a community is very, very important. What have you found to be the successes in terms of how do you go out, how do you attract the right people, like-minded people, same passion, vision, drive? What's been some of the successful paths for you?
So I have a very vivid example, actually. You may have witnessed my CEO's talk yesterday, Dr. Bruce Wilcox, who shared his amazing story with his son. And this is something that could impact anybody. So sometimes, as you said, as a father innovator, but also as an entrepreneur, it can get very lonely. So it's attracting communities such as this one that will bring visibility to what you think is impossible, and putting out in the community and saying, how can we all together come together, share the data, think about research partnerships, and making this possible. So I'm truly inspired by the people I've met here, and I do believe that together, as you said, if we are courageous enough to expose ourselves, our vulnerabilities, we can start then to think pragmatically, what strategy can we put forward together as a community to move? So I'm inspired by the people I've met here. The lady we all heard yesterday talk about her personal story, the G9, was incredible. And there's an overlap with the story of my CEO. So these people should talk together, right, and unite these communities. And I'm grateful for you putting this together so we can all start these dialogues.
Great, thank you, thank you. I want to ask if there's any questions out there, please raise your hand, I'll bring the mic over. If there are, I'm sorry, but they are around. Thank you all very much, appreciate it, cheers.